Welcome to the Saturday Cadence Podcast. I'm Blake Biscardi, and remember, the Saturday Cadence Podcast is the heartbeat of college football. For the second time this year, we told you those upsets were coming, and they sure did. Number 3, Georgia, and number 4, Miami both go down on Saturday in some big upsets. Ole Miss took down Georgia, reinserts itself in the SEC race, and now the college football playoff race. Georgia seems to be reeling at this point in time as turnover issues continue to plague the Dogs, especially from Carson Beck. And Miami is one of those teams that we were waiting for. Are they going to lose? Are they just going to keep winning ugly? Is it going to be close? Something has to give here, and it finally did on Saturday. So my name is Blake Biscardi, and welcome into Saturday Cadence. Welcome to the Week 11 recap show. Lots to get to, just telling you a little bit about the Georgia-Miami losses, other games across the board that we're going to talk about. Indiana surviving a scare from Michigan. We also saw Clemson have a scare. They ended up coming back to win the game. Colorado survived. Alabama, big story of the day here. I want to lead the show with Alabama LSU. Jalen Milroe. All the doubts that we had about Jalen Milroe on the road, all the doubts we had about Alabama and the defense, all the doubts we had about Kalen DeBoer. Now, when I say we, I'm talking about the college football public, not necessarily myself, even though I did pick LSU to win the game. Jalen Milroe, Kalen DeBoer, that entire Alabama staff and team and program answered the bell of doubt strongly in Death Valley. Brian Kelly was previously 13-0 in night games in his time at LSU. At home, that streak ended 42-6 was the score until a garbage time touchdown at the end. Alabama had the backups in. LSU opted to keep the starters out on the field, scoring a touchdown there. So the final was 42-13. But Jalen Milroe, what a day that he had. This was what we thought it would look like for most of the year for Milroe. And kind of in a nutshell, that's what we got. He only threw for 109 yards, but that's because he didn't need to. He ran for 185 yards on 12 carries, 4 touchdowns on the day, that big 72-yard run being his best. Now, Jalen Milroe is one of the most dynamic playmakers in the country. He was Alabama's whole offense. I mean, we have talked about ad nauseum Jam Miller and Justice Haynes' inability to run the football consistently in the big games this year, the offensive line not being as strong, that has been the focal point of the weaknesses on the Alabama offense. But what we saw from Jalen Milroe, he came in that game early and often, and he took it over. It was as if he said, we're not losing this game. I'm putting the team on my back. And he shouldered that entire team to victory, 42-13. Alabama in control the entire time. Garrett Nussmeier turned the ball over a couple of times. He had the 2 picks. He threw for 239 yards and a touchdown at the end to Kyron Lacey. Outside of that, LSU, gotta get the old Brian Kelly out of my system there. LSU did not do much of anything in this contest. Alabama have 400 yards. They were 10 of 13 on third down. I mean, you just look up and down the stat sheet, and that is a recipe for a big win. This was completely dominant from Alabama, offensively and defensively. I mean, when you are 10 of 13 on third down, 23 first downs, you're throwing the ball. You didn't really need to. 6 yards of completion is not great, but it's good. But then when you're running the ball for 6.5 yards a clip in a ranked SEC showdown on the road, well done. Tip of the cap to Alabama, now back in the SEC race and the college football playoff race. We were talking about this as a potential elimination game. And now if it was close, the way these other teams have been losing at the top, I think there would be room for argument for the loser to come in, more so if it was Alabama because of that big win against Georgia. But LSU is out of this thing. They do not have a path in my mind to the playoff unless by some tiebreaker, which is about 1.5 miles long in the SEC tiebreakers. We're not even going to get into that. We will wait until we need to. LSU does not have a path as an at-large team. I just don't think you're surviving a loss this bad, especially when you have 3 losses. I can see it if you lost close, but now losing back-to-back games to Texas A&M by double digits and now to Alabama by double digits. There's just not a path here for LSU. But Alabama, I like where they're at this point in the season. The schedule for them, this is something that I want to point out because we know they have the Iron Bowl at the end, but the next two games, Mercer and Oklahoma. Now that game is going to be in Norman, so it won't be easy, but Oklahoma has struggled offensively this year. Brett Venables really has to figure something out there in that program. But I think Alabama is going to finish this thing 10-2, and we'll see where they go from here because I think they're going to end up in the playoff. So we're going to stick in the SEC. The next game I want to talk about is Ole Miss and Georgia. This is a game that Ole Miss dominated. They controlled. It rained, and they were still able to move the football. I think that was indicative of the game plan that they had. Georgia now a second conference loss. That has not happened in some years. This is the first time they've lost to a team not named Alabama since 2020. Ole Miss improved to 8-2. They were previously 16th in the CFP poll, and Georgia was 3. I think we're going to see some big movement from both of these teams. I would not be surprised to actually see Ole Miss jump Georgia. Now, that sounds insane, but with some of the losses that we're talking about on some other teams, I just would not be surprised to see Ole Miss starting to creep toward the top 10. Look at this game, though. Carson Beck turned the ball over. He also had a fumble. Jackson Dart had 199 yards through the air, a touchdown and a pick. I mean, you're just looking at this. Nothing crazy jumps off the page because Ole Miss had a lot of field goals. Georgia's defense, I thought, played really well. The offense just didn't do anything. I mean, when you can only run the football for 59 yards on 33 carries, yikes. That was a storyline for me. Is Georgia, again, struggled to run the football. When you make a team one-dimensional that has weaknesses and a turnover-prone quarterback, you're not going to win a lot of games. And Ole Miss made Georgia one-dimensional. They could not run the football, just 1.8 yards a carry. Abysmal. Ole Miss ran it for just about 4, so they didn't run the ball that well, but they ran the ball good enough in order to win that game. Neither team was really outstanding on third down either. Georgia 6-14, so it's a good number on the road, not great. And Ole Miss was only 4-13. So you're looking at this, like I said, Georgia's defense is keeping it in games this year, and it kept it closer than I think it would have if Georgia did not have as strong of a defense. But you have to tip your cap to Lane Kiffin and Jackson Dart and the Ole Miss program for being able to get this win, gaining 400 yards on the day. Georgia only 245, its lowest since 2017. So with Georgia, we're going to talk more about this on the Thursday show. Once the college football playoff rankings come out, we'll be able to have a better idea of what Georgia's path to the playoff looks like. I still think that they're alive. I don't think that Georgia's eliminated with 2 losses. However, they play Tennessee next week, which is going to be an opportunity to get a big win to recover. I don't think Georgia's out of the playoff by any stretch. I just think it muddies the water in the SEC because there are so many teams in the Southeastern Conference that are in contention. I mean, I'm going to read you the SEC standings real quick with the conference records so you can see this. Tennessee 5-1, Texas A&M 5-1, Texas 5-1, or 4-1 in conference. Those are your top 3 teams in the SEC race right now. Right behind that, you have a pool of 2-loss teams, and that will be Georgia has 2 losses in the SEC, Ole Miss 2, Alabama 2, Missouri also has 2 losses, LSU still has 2 losses. The SEC race is going to be tight. It's going to be a finish. We see some of these teams still playing each other. Tennessee still has to play Georgia. Texas still has to play Texas A&M. A lot of games still ahead. So I'm very curious to see how that tiebreaker goes. And there's not a world that we try to get into it on this show because it is just ridiculous. Over to the Miami game. Let's see what happened in this game to make Miami lose. They have been flirting with a loss for some weeks now. And the offense, I think, still played okay. Cam Ward, when you look at his numbers, I mean, he's been in the front of the Heisman Trophy race. He threw for 3 touchdowns and 348 yards. So that's a good day. Georgia Tech just happened to be better. They just happened to win the game, and they did it 28-23. So Miami falling now, that's really hurting the ACC's playoff hopes. And I say that because there was a thought that potentially SMU and Clemson meet in the ACC title game, and SMU wins, and Miami's been good enough and undefeated all year. That's their first loss. They've got to stay in the playoff, right? That was the ACC's path to 2. I don't think that path exists anymore. I think whoever wins the ACC is going to be in, and then I think it's going to be too crowded with those 4 Big Ten teams, and then that cluster of SEC teams. Is it going to be 4 of them? Is it going to be 5? what happens? I think that gets into insane territory if we get to 5, because that would mean Notre Dame would have to be out of the playoff, or maybe one of those Big Ten teams, probably Indiana, does not make the field because they either lose once and the resume is not strong enough, or they just happen to lose twice and the resume is still not strong enough. So I think the ACC is in a challenging position when it comes to the playoff and trying to get multiple teams in, as is the Big 12. However, the Big 12 survived better than the ACC did yesterday because BYU, thanks to a very questionable and egregious defensive penalty by Utah on 4th and 10 late in that game that extended the drive for BYU. I don't know if that's the call I would have made there. I can see the argument. I just don't think it was the right call. So the Holy War goes to BYU 22-21 on the last second field goal. So that Utah cover works, just not how I thought it was going to. So BYU 22-21, they survive. So now in the Big 12 race, you're looking at an undefeated BYU still. Colorado, biggest beneficiaries again of some of these teams that are losing. Iowa State went down, so that opens the door in the Big 12 for Colorado, which survived in Lubbock against Texas Tech. So now Colorado sole possession of second place. They are on the inside track to get to the Big 12 title game. And again, I told you this last week. I think Colorado will get there. This was their toughest remaining game. They just won it on the road. I think Colorado will beat BYU, and I don't think BYU will be able to have a strong enough resume to outdo one of those at-large SEC or Big Ten teams to get in the field. I think Colorado will be the Big 12 representative. So we will see what happens there, because as it stands, Deion Sanders, Travis Hunter, Sheduer Sanders, 60 to go to the playoff. I will take the Buffaloes. So elsewhere in the country, Ohio State very dominant yesterday, 45 to nothing rather. Defense played well, had 2 turnovers. Lathan Ransom with a pick. JT Tuimoloau strip sack, which led to a scoop and score for Jack Sawyer. Will Howard again played well. At running backs played well. Ohio State dealing another shutout. The Buckeyes have not allowed an offensive touchdown since the 4th quarter against Nebraska. So that is 2 full games and about 10 minutes of game time that they have not allowed an offensive touchdown. They've got Northwestern coming up this week. So we'll see if that streak extends. Army, again, big win. They're staying alive in this group of 5 race. Can they win the American? Can they be the team that gets into the college football playoff from the group of 5? Boise State would have to lose. They were in a tight matchup yesterday. So Army staying around, staying undefeated. Coming up for them, though, they have to play Notre Dame on November 23rd. So a bye week this week, and then they've got Notre Dame. What a massive opportunity that is for the Black Knights, but also the Fighting Irish, because Notre Dame has quietly become 8-1, dominating opponents by double digits. They've won every single game by double digits except for one since they lost to NIU. Notre Dame beats Army, locked in the playoff, in my opinion. So that is something to watch, because if Army then can beat Notre Dame, which is a top 10, might be borderline a top 5 team, depending on the results of these games the next couple of weeks. What a debate we would have with Army and Boise State. Just keep your eye on that battle. Again, as we get through November. More of the same. Oregon also dominated yesterday. Tennessee dominated. A big one against Georgia this week. Notre Dame, like I said, all these wins by double digits. Florida State wiped the floor with them, 52-3. Got some concern with Mike Norvell on that program down there. I know that they need to they're taking on a lot of water. They need to get through this season. It's a forgotten season. Your recruiting is good. You got to plug some holes on the transfer portal and then figure out the culture issues. I think that program will be okay, but it's the panic button. You're hitting it now in Tallahassee. They are not good this year, and it is unfortunate to have that kind of a fall off. Penn State, though, the whiteout on Peacock, I just don't understand this again. I know I talked about it before. I just don't understand how you're putting one of the best spectacles of the sport on a streaming service. And I get you want to have those fans go over there and get the subscription money, and you want to put a name brand there. I just don't think the whiteout is the time to do that, because it is one of those spectacles that you just have to see in the sport. And you don't want that on a streaming service where you're just committed to that game when there's other games at night there. not going to get into the contract negotiations and the inner workings there. I just don't agree putting it there. But Penn State took care of business. Usually that's a letdown spot after Ohio State. It's why I took Washington to cover. But Washington had opportunities they didn't capitalize. They should have covered it. It was a closer game on the field than the score indicates, but Penn State still controlled the game, dominated the game. Defense played well, got off the field, got stops, and Drew Aller looked very comfortable. Tyler Warren also had a big day, and Singleton had a kick return wiped off the board due to a very, again, questionable holding penalty. But that's where I'm sitting right now with all this stuff. I mean, you're looking around the country, the races are starting to take form. I think as we get into November, you're going to see more and more clarity. But it is just so interesting watching some of these upsets that happen and these teams that are losing. The AP poll coming out, so we can talk about that really quickly just to see. I know the college football playoff rankings are the ones that we care about now moving forward, but I said the AP poll will correct itself, and the AP poll did correct itself a little bit, but now Indiana jumps 3 spots in the AP poll. So we'll see if the college football playoff committee follows suit there. Indiana is now a top 5 team. That could give Ohio State, assuming both teams take care of, well, Ohio State takes care of business, Indiana's off, a third top 5 game for the Buckeyes just this season in the last 6 weeks. So the AP poll goes Oregon, Ohio State, Texas, Penn State, Indiana. 4 Big Ten teams in the top 5. I don't know if that has happened in recent memory. I don't know if the Big Ten's ever had that happen, but in the expanded era, we have now got 4 Big Ten teams in the top 5. Tennessee follows right behind, BYU up to 7, Notre Dame 8. This is exactly what I was telling you. This is what I thought. Alabama into the top 10. Ole Miss jumps Georgia. Georgia falls all the way down to 11. This is how I have it ranked in my rankings. I think the College Football Playoff Committee will follow suit with this. Alabama, Ole Miss, Georgia will be in a row just like that. Both teams holding the head-to-head over Georgia. I think they fall in that line of 2 lost teams, and then Miami sitting right behind them. I think that is also the correct spot at 12 for Miami. So we will see. That is exactly how I think the playoff committee ranking should look with those 3 teams. I think that's what's going to happen. And then I think the debate between Indiana and Tennessee for the 5 spot will be very interesting there, comparing those resumes. Tennessee having the bigger win over Alabama, but the worst loss to Arkansas. Indiana does not have a loss, and they've beaten all the teams on their schedule and really taken care of business. This was the first time that a game was ever in quote-unquote doubt for them against Michigan on Saturday. But again, they found the way to win, and now they've faced adversity, and they've responded. They are 10-0 for the first time in program history. Now Iowa State and Vanderbilt, the only 2 teams to not have a 10-win season. So that is my recap show for this week. We will have thoughts on the college football playoff rankings when they come out. We'll look at the bracket again and how everything is falling into place in November, because the games you remember are played in November, something I always want you to keep in mind as we continue down this incredible college football season. So much is happening. The games are awesome. So many big matchups. The 12-team playoff is going to be outstanding. I cannot wait for it. I was originally against it, but I think the absolute cinema we're going to get from the 12-team field will be something to be held. So again, that's today's show. Thank you for listening to the episode. Make sure you're liking and subscribing to our channel, sharing with your friends. Leave us a review. It really helps us out. Check us out on our social media channels at Saturday Cadence for more content throughout the week. And remember, the Saturday Cadence podcast is the heartbeat of college football. I am Blake Biscardi. We will see you on the Thursday show. In the meantime, God bless.